listener production.
Hey, Chris Spear with you. Welcome to The Briefing. Nearly 60 years ago, hundreds of Australians shocked the globe claiming they witnessed a UFO hovering above schools in Melbourne.
After the incident, he had an unwelcomed, unsolicited visit at his home. A gentleman dressed in military attire basically threatened him, gave him a veiled threat and said, if you talk about it, you'll be fired and you'll never be able to get another job.
Now there's a push for a parliamentary inquiry to look into the incident that's been shrouded in secrecy for decades. That chat is coming up in the second half of this episode. First, though, let's get into the headlines with Tara Cassidy. It's Friday, the 19th of September.
Hey Chris, and to you listening, Donald Trump has again weighed in on late-night comedian Jimmy Kimmel being taken off air after comments he made about Charlie Kirk, saying it's not a free speech issue.
Jimmy Kimmel is not a talented person. He had very bad ratings, and they should have fired him a long time ago. So, you can call that free speech or not. He was fired for lack of talent.
That's the US president speaking on ITV overnight there. And earlier in the day, he had congratulated the American Broadcasting Company on having the, quote, courage to do what had to be done, saying the decision now leaves Jimmy Fallon and Seth Meyers to total losers on fake news NBC. And again, that's a quote, Chris, not me saying that.
Yeah, and now just to recap, Kimmel's show was suspended indefinitely yesterday after he made these comments about the politicisation of the conservative activist's death.
The MAGA gang desperately trying to characterize this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them and doing everything they can to score political points from it.
And he also made these comments poking fun at some of the president's commentary around Charlie Kirk's death.
You can see how hard the president is taking this.
My condolences on the loss of your friend Charlie Kirk. How are you holding up?
I think very good. And by the way, right there, you see all the trucks? They've just started construction of the new ballroom for the White House.
Yes. Okay. This is not how an adult grieves the murder of someone he called a friend. This is how a 4-year-old mourns a goldfish, okay?
Now, we did do a deep dive into this yesterday afternoon, so definitely hop back and listen to that. But since then, we have heard from a bunch of prominent Democrat leaders who have labelled the show suspension a corrupt abuse of power and an attack on free speech.
Yeah, and we've also heard from former President Barack Obama, who has accused the Trump administration of taking cancel culture to a very new and dangerous level, saying this was precisely the kind of government coercion that the First Amendment was designed to prevent. Now, for those that don't know, the First Amendment is basically part of the US Constitution's Bill of Rights, and it's about stopping the government from interfering with a person's freedom of speech, religion, assembly, etc.
Yeah, and this is a really tricky area of law, as all constitutional areas of law are. But we do have legal precedent in the US that pretty much says the government cannot punish someone for hate and offensive speech because it's covered under this First Amendment. But the First Amendment only restricts government activities, Tara, not the activities of private institutions, which is arguably what we've seen here. It's a commercial decision to pull a show with alleged government interference, which makes this even messier. Now, how the US approached this is very unique. Legal scholars have long pointed out that it's at odds with the rest of the world. So, for example, in Australia, we don't technically have freedom of speech laws because if we did, it would be at odds with our anti-discrimination legislation. But in the US, there are some exceptions to this First Amendment protection, and essentially it stops protecting people when their free speech is inciting or containing real threats of violence or meets the legal standard for harassment in certain circumstances.
An Australian state has become the first to ban pill testing, going against advice from various health and drug harm experts, even a government-commissioned report. Last night, the Queensland government rushed through the legislation in Parliament, and it comes after it axed funding for a pill testing service earlier this year that planned to reopen after securing a private investor. But Deputy Premier Jared Blais says that the government will do whatever is necessary to stop it from going ahead.
And this is despite an independent University of Queensland study commissioned by the former Labor government to determine the effectiveness of such services. And that actually found they'd be beneficial for public safety. So this same study, Tara, is one that the current government was refusing to release for a long time. Drug harm prevention agencies had tried to FOI it. They got refused. But after much public pressure, it came out not too long ago. And it basically showed the drug market in Queensland is rife and more than half of those tested have ingredients that users weren't anticipating. But what these pill testing services do, and the positives of these pill testing services, is that they detect any dangerous or lethal ingredients or potency levels, and they actually trigger alerts to be sent out, letting people know that they're circulating around these environments. So like at music festivals and things like that.
Yeah, that's right. And then also a few months back, I actually spoke to the QNADA, which is the Queensland Network of Alcohol and Other Drug Agencies, and its CEO, Rebecca Lang. And she basically said that we know lethal drugs like nitazenes, which is that zombie drug, that they're already circulating in Australia and have already caused a number of deaths.
And what we're seeing down south is that nitazenes are turning up in drugs that are not being sold as opioids. So people have been sold cocaine. The cocaine has nitazenes in it.
Now, if you want to listen to the rest of that deep dive, we will chuck a link in the show notes. But basically, Rebecca said that even without this study, there is a lot of international literature also that shows while pill testing isn't going to save the world, it definitely does help the people who use them.
The doctor who first notified police about triple murderer Erin Patterson has been punished by the medical regulator after referring to the mushroom cook as a, quote, disturbed sociopathic nutbag. Dr. Chris Webster, who was working at Leongatha Hospital when Patterson arrived with gastro-like symptoms back in 2023 and actually testified in her trial, also gave several interviews throughout the media storm.
She's evil. She had a problem. She had a dilemma. And the solution that she chose is sociopathic.
Yeah, and then he went on to make similar comments in an interview with the Herald Sun where he called Erin Patterson a, quote, crazy bitch and, like you mentioned, Chris, a, quote, disturbed sociopathic nutbag. Now, it's those comments in particular that have triggered a widespread backlash, and there was multiple complaints to the Medical Board of Australia who this week have imposed 2 conditions on his registration. The first one being mandatory one-on-one professional and ethical training, and the other being monthly mentoring sessions focused on confidentiality and professional communication, Chris.
Yeah, speaking to media, Webster says he's accepted the conditions but was disappointed by the, quote, onerous time commitment of the mentoring sessions, which are 5 one-hour sessions on a monthly basis, adding it will take him away from the community and diminish the number of patients he will be able to see, Tara.
Yeah, and look, I'm not entirely surprised this has happened. We did actually reach out to Dr. Webster at the time as well, and he replied saying basically he couldn't take part and apologies. He was going media silent because 5 complaints had been made. Basically, he said accusing him of being misogynistic and ableist, and that people were disgusted in his comments and, quote, the way he treated his former patients. So I guess those people who complained might be happy in this outcome.
The French first couple are set to submit scientific evidence to a US court to prove the president's wife, Brigitte Macron, is not a man. This comes after the pair launched defamation proceedings against controversial US podcaster Candace Owens, who's flamed the wild conspiracy theory on her social media, YouTube, and podcast platforms for years. In fact, she even dedicated a whole 8-part series to it labeled Becoming Brigitte.
I would stake my entire professional career on the fact that Brigitte Macron, the current First Lady of France, was born a man.
Now, that's not the only bizarre allegation Candace Owens has made to her many, many millions of followers, Chris. She also claimed in the series that Brigitte has stolen her identity, committed crimes including fraud and forgery, and that the Macrons committed incest. Now, as a result of all of these claims, basically in July, the Macrons filed a defamation suit in a US court saying that Candace is spreading verifiably false and devastating lies to try and boost her own public profile. And despite their repeated attempts to ask her to stop and to retract those comments, she hasn't.
And we've actually heard from the Macron's lawyers, Tom Clare. He's spoken on a BBC podcast to say they'll be bringing in expert evidence to prove the claims about Brigitte aren't true.
There will be expert testimony that will come out that will be scientific in nature. It is a process that she will have to subject herself to in a very public way. But she's willing to do it. She is firmly resolved to do what it takes to set the record straight.
Now, while I was away, Tara, you and Helen did your own little series on this, a 2-part deep dive, delving into everything we know about this story, the conspiracy theory, Candace Owens, and the defamation suit. Search the Macrons versus Candace Owens wherever you listen to your podcast, and we will chuck the link to that in our show notes.
And if you're a dog-obsessed weirdo like me whose pets are in fact your children, Chris, this next story is for you. A new survey has found many Aussies regularly go above and beyond for their pets, which might not be the study's wording, but anyway, confessing that they cook for their pets, leave the telly or radio on for them, give them presents, bring them on holidays, and even take time off work to care for them. And the most common one, though, over 60% of us doing this, talking to your pets as if they understand you. And I mean, I did out myself as dog obsessed, but are these really that strange? Because I might have ticked off all of them.
Yeah, look, I'm with you too. And I actually think I've caused permanent hearing damage to my dog for leaving the telly and radio on for her as a pup. And I've also been in the habit of cooking for her, Tara Cassidy. And you know I famously don't even cook for myself. And it has been the hardest thing I've embarked on. But allegedly the vet says it's really good for her health. Anyway, those were all the findings of the Triennial Animal Medicines Australia survey. That's how we found all this out. It also revealed our favourite breeds and pet names. Tara, any guesses for the most popular breed at the moment?
I'm just going to base this off every second person on my dog walls having this breed, but it's got to be some kind of oodle.
Yes, it's poodle crosses. They're the most common designer breed, with labs, golden retrievers and border collies also making the list. Hey, that is it for our headlines for today and for this week. Next up is your deep dive, Tara, looking into the world of UFOs, the most famous sighting in Australia, its cover-up, and why the government should be taking UFO encounters a little bit more seriously. Stick around, that deep dive for your Friday is coming up next.
This is Australia's most famous UFO sighting.
The Westall UFO encounter.
Mr. Greenwood, there's things in the sky, there's flying saucers in the sky.
We noticed these 3 craft hovering above the school.
Yes, there were flying saucers in the sky.
It's the UFO incident that captured the attention of the world. In 1966, over 200 Australian students and teachers from 2 Westall schools in Melbourne reported they saw flying objects hovering in the sky.
It was a grey, almost cylindrical object.
I could feel a heat and hear this buzzing sound.
Before being silenced by government officials and authorities.
They were threatening.
Oh, absolutely. I was threatened.
We were all told that we hadn't seen anything, it was a weather balloon. We were all massively hysterical. If you talk about it, you'll get into trouble.
April 6 next year will mark 60 years since the mysterious incident, yet those involved say they've still never had answers, with a petition now calling for the government to hold a Westall parliamentary inquiry to reveal the truth once and for all. Here to discuss this topic today is the man behind the petition, UAP researcher and activist Grant Lavac. Grant, thanks so much for joining me on the briefing today. Why do we need an inquiry?
I've been researching the Westall incident, which happened on the 6th of April 1966, and having met with, a couple of years ago, a number of primary witnesses, I found their recollections to be incredibly compelling. And what is so frustrating for so many witnesses who were school children on the day of the Westall incident, 60 years on, almost 60 years on, there's never been any official explanation provided by the Australian government or from the Australian Department of Defence as to what it was they saw in the sky above their school on the 6th of April 1966. And so despite the best efforts of researchers, and even myself, we've tried diligently to try and secure for at least documentation from the Australian Department of Defence, the National Archives of Australia, and all Freedom of Information Act requests have not yielded any fruit. So I decided, well, let's petition the Australian government, submitted a petition to the House of Representatives requesting an independent inquiry into the Westall incident, because I think, 60 years on, so many witnesses have lived with this experience, and their frustration is not so much that what they saw, their frustration sits with the fact that they were told to shut up about it. And so I think it's long overdue for, if it was something that was prosaic that they observed in the sky above their school on the 6th of April 1966, it's about time for the Australian government to come clean, be transparent, and provide answers to the witnesses as to what they saw on that day.
And you mentioned you spoke to some of the students, and I think there was a teacher who also talked about witnessing this event. They, as you mentioned, accused the government and authorities of threatening them and telling them to stay quiet about what they saw. Do we have any insight into why we think that was?
It's a good question, and it's not just so. There was up to 200 school children that witnessed something in the sky above their school. Many of them recount that what they saw resembled the shape of a flying saucer, but it wasn't just the school children. There were up to 3 teachers that also saw something on that day, and the most prominent teacher, his name was Andrew Greenwood, who sadly passed away earlier this year. He was 20 years old on the day of the Westall incident. He was a science teacher, and he observed in the sky above the school something truly anomalous.
I observed the object that everyone was looking at. It took me a while to see it.
And the object was still airborne then?
Oh, yes. We're never sure at any stage that it was anything else but airborne. It was cylindrical, cigar-shaped, except on occasions appeared to bulge in the middle.
In the days after the incident, he had an unwelcomed, unsolicited visit at his home, his front door, a gentleman dressed in military attire and a second gentleman dressed in civil attire, and basically threatened him, gave him a veiled threat and said, if you talk about what it is you saw, it will be very easy for your colleagues and co-workers to think you were drunk on the day of the incident. And in short, saying if you talk about it, you'll be fired and you'll never be able to get another job. And he held that for so many years before going public. He came out, I think, a couple of years ago, and he publicly revealed that to the world that he was threatened in the days following the incident. Now, why were they threatened? If it was something that was so prosaic, let's assume it was, some top secret technology that the Australian government didn't want the Australian public or potentially its foreign adversaries to be aware of. Well, surely that technology is no longer classified. It's now, redundant technology. So the government should come forward and reveal what people saw on the 6th of April, 1966. We live in a very different world today where our US ally and Five Eyes partner is taking the topic of UAP incredibly seriously from a national security threat and safety of flight risk. So if what it was that folks saw was something that cannot be explained as prosaic, well, there's your compelling reason for the Royal Australian Air Force and Australian Department of Defence to consider revisiting its long-held position on UAP.
And this space is being taken more seriously internationally. There were hearings, I understand, in the US where a number of witnesses were called to testify in Congress about their experiences with UAPs. Have you been following along?
I have, yeah. And it's the US Congress just held, to your point, its 6th hearing on this topic, UAP, in just over 3 years, which is incredible. So it's clear that the US Congress and the United States Department of Defense is taking this topic incredibly seriously.
I'm here today because the American people have both the right and the responsibility to know the truth about unidentified aerial phenomenon. That truth remains hidden, classified and silenced by fear, retaliation, stigma, and confusion.
Today, I want to state clearly that this is not science fiction or creating speculation. This is about national security, government accountability, and the American people's right to the truth.
And what kind of things have we heard from the witnesses that have been speaking at these hearings?
Yeah, so in the most recent hearing, you had a number of first-hand witnesses, former defence personnel, who had all witnessed something incredibly extraordinary in the line of their official duties for the defence service that they were assigned.
Between 2003 and 2005, 5 UAP incidents occurred at Vandenberg Air Force Base. While I was on duty, security guards at a critical launch site reported a bright, fast-moving object over the ocean. I heard my friends screaming, "It's coming right at us." When I arrived on scene, I talked to 5 shaken witnesses who described a massive triangular craft larger than a football field that hovered silently for about 45 seconds before shooting away at impossible speed.
What I observed was not consistent with conventional aircraft. A self-luminous, tic-tac-shaped object emerged from the ocean before linking up with 3 other similar objects.
The craft interfered with my telephone, did not have any sound, and the material it was made of appeared fluid or dynamic.
They all recounted and testified that they had witnessed firsthand something truly extraordinary that they weren't able to readily identify, explain, or reconcile, that did not conform to any of the known technology or military assets in the possession of the United States Department of Defense, and they were of the opinion that either this technology is American technology that's in the black, that is being withheld from congressional oversight, and or it is something that is truly exotic, that is otherworldly, and is potentially non-human intelligence in origin. And so you listen to what those witnesses testified, and they were all very compelling and credible. Their backgrounds are impeccable in terms of their credentials, and their testimony was incredibly compelling. So you have just further anecdotal evidence. There is something that folks are observing in US airspace that cannot be readily explained. The US has said time and time again, this is an issue that's not just isolated to the United States and should be taken seriously by allies of the US.
One of the things that also came out of this hearing was from NASA, the US space agency, saying it's not found any credible evidence of extraterrestrial life or that UAPs are extraterrestrial. What do you say to that?
That's a stark contrast to the allegations and testimony that many folks within their intelligence community or the Department of Defense, current or retired, are stating publicly. The frustration is we, the public, both the American and the Australian public, we're yet to see any evidence to support those claims. Now, the folks that have come forward and testified, they're all stating publicly under oath, under penalty of perjury, that information is classified. Unfortunately, the House Oversight Committee does not have the appropriate classifications or security clearances, nor do the witnesses to receive that classified testimony.
It feels like the public is more open to the idea that, okay, perhaps UFOs and UAPs exist, but there's still some critics and skeptics when it comes to talking about extraterrestrial connections and things like that. Do you think that's how it's being perceived at the moment?
Well, I think it's important to certainly stay skeptical, but open to the possibilities that there is certainly life beyond this planet. I mean, it's now, I believe, broadly accepted within the scientific community that it's pretty much implausible that intelligent life does not exist beyond our solar system. If you just look at the Drake equation alone and what the Hubble telescope and the James Webb telescope is now able to uncover through new technology, every star system, every solar system out there has one or two or more rocky planets that potentially live in the habitable zone like planet Earth. So it's now more probable than not that there is intelligent life throughout our universe. Now, the question is, has that intelligent life visited planet Earth? And that is the big question that remains unanswered.
And perhaps we'll find out more if this inquiry does come to fruition. The petition for that closes at the end of this week. Grant, really appreciate your time today. Thanks so much for joining me on The Briefing.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me, Tara.
That was UAP researcher and activist Grant Lavac speaking with me there. And that's it for this episode of The Briefing. If you found this ep interesting, don't forget to leave us a comment or a review, or you can check us out on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast. I'm Tara Cassidy. See you next time.